This is a comparison of 3 skulls of modern and archaic human skulls. So first up, I'm going to show you a modern human skull. I should mention that all of these are casts of the originals with some reconstruction work going into them. I'm just going to move quickly through this because I suppose the interesting parts are really in the comparisons. So this is a side profile. Okay, next we're going to move to a Cro-Magnon skull. Now, the Cro-Magnons were classically described as early modern humans, and now they're used to denote early modern humans in Europe. The first radiocarbon dating is about 35,000 years ago. This specimen is estimated to be between 10 and 30,000 years ago and was recovered from a gravel pit. The age has been determined from the associated animal findings. Unfortunately, a number of the upper teeth are missing. Let's bring back the modern human skull. Now, the Cro-Magnon skull looks a little bit shorter vertically, but that's because of the collapse due to the loss of the teeth. If you notice on the right hand side, the chin is very prominent on the Cro-Magnon specimen. The orbital region, the eye sockets, in other words, in the Cro-Magnon specimen appear slightly larger than the modern human. If you also look here, you see the supraorbital ridge is quite pronounced. There's a little bit of a brow there compared to the modern human. So now what I'm going to do is bring up another specimen, this time a classic Neanderthal. Okay, so almost immediately this specimen is looking quite different to the other two. Let's bring up a modern human for comparison. Now, I suppose if you just look directly at the skulls face on, what you'll notice is that the orbital region, the eye sockets in the Neanderthal skull, are very large in comparison to the human skull. Also, the brow ridge, this is really defining the Neanderthals. It's a very pronounced, thick, bony ridge, which is completely different from the human skull. You also notice that the nasal region, the sinuses, and the ethmoid plate are obviously missing from the Neanderthal skull, possibly due to damage of the original specimen. But what is fairly evident, and is repeated in other findings, is that this nasal opening in the Neanderthals is much larger than in humans. And the idea here was that Neanderthals have just a very large nose that's filled with lots of mucus to warm the air as it breathes through the nose. And that would be useful for the environment it was living in, because it was freezing cold. So this was thought to be a way that the Neanderthals adapted to their environment. Now, something that isn't really often commented on, but is fairly obvious if you look at these specimens, is the teeth. So if you look at the human teeth here, we've got all the usual incisors and canines and molars and premolars. And then if we just move this aside and look at the Neanderthal, you know, what is going on here? This is just remarkable. This Neanderthal specimen has basically just looks as though all of the teeth have been filed down. And just get some indication here. This is the human jawbone, the mandible, and this is the Neanderthal. Just give you some comparisons here. What's obvious is that in this specimen at least, these Neanderthal teeth are just massive, and the jawbone is just massive in comparison to the human one. And what's also very interesting is that these lower teeth at the front, the incisors, are actually aligned at 90 degrees to the human equivalent. Now, I'm not sure if this is just some result of compression of the jawbone over a lengthy period of time, but basically it looks as though the Neanderthals have their teeth, the lower teeth, orientated in a completely different direction, and they've had them chiseled down or filed down. It looks as though that might have happened. What's also impressive is that the Neanderthal has a full set of teeth. So for the next surprise, I think it's useful just to have a look from the side. So what we're going to do is just turn the skulls around and just have a side profile and just examine or compare the brain cases. So again, I find this just remarkable. If we go here from the chin, or rather where the chin is in humans, because Neanderthals famously don't have a chin, so sorry about that. We go all the way back here to the occipital region, the very back of the skull. We see there's just this massive and distance, the anterior posterior distance from the base of the skull and the vertex through to the tip of the mandible. And what we also see here is this zygomatic arch, which is just very thickened compared to the human equivalent. Now if we look at the modern human, we see a very thin zygomatic arch. We see a very short, more upright skull. So people would think there's more frontal lobe development in modern humans. But actually when you look at the brain endocasts, you find that what's happened is it's just the way the Neanderthal brain case is structured. And to me it looks almost as though in this specimen the Neanderthal is almost protecting its brain case. It's got this, what I like to think of as an industrial strength face. This is, this thickened brow ridge, the thickened zygomatic arch, the thick, chunky mandible. All of these things are just looking as though they're built to protect it. And it's understandable because in that environment, the Neanderthal was up against the cave bear, a massive creature, bigger than current day brown bears. It was up against the saber-toothed tiger, the cave lion, the woolly mammoth, all of these massive creatures, the woolly rhinoceros. And it was fighting for its survival. What's also remarkable here is, in this specimen, the brain capacity, or the cranial capacity I should say, is 1600 cc. You can't directly go from the cranial capacity to the brain volume. You have to get an endocast to see what impressions the brain has left on the skull interior of the skull case. But it's a fairly good indicator of what the brain volume is likely to be. And here we have a modern human, much smaller cranial capacity in comparison. Now, one final comparison I'm going to make is, again, to compare the Cro-Magnon and the modern human from a side profile. So again, it should be fairly obvious when I move this forwards, move this up, that the modern human cranial capacity is smaller than the Cro-Magnon specimen. And again, what's happened is that you've got a development of the Cro-Magnon skull posteriorly, so it's moving further back than the modern human skull. And again, if we just look from this angle, we're seeing something quite interesting. There, this difference in cranial capacity becomes quite obvious. And you'll notice also that there are some interesting differences in the sutures, although I'm not sure how accurate these are in the reproduction, although I would imagine they're fairly accurate. But in the modern human skull, you've got fairly straight, few kind of curves, or sinus waves I like to think of them as, whereas in the Cro-Magnon specimen you have a big squiggly line moving all the way through, separating the different plates, cranial plates. Okay, now this is a comparison of the modern human with a Neanderthal skull, and this Neanderthal skull just goes back and back and just kind of expands out at the back, which is quite incredible really. I mean, it's fairly obvious, there's an almost egg shape to the human skull from this angle. But here what we have is it's filling out towards the back. Now this filling out, I think, is quite interesting because it looks to be the area where the temporal lobe joins to the occipital cortex. In other words, this is the area where the region of the brain which is related to memory is impacting on the occipital cortex, the part of the brain that's related to vision. And this is a characteristic of the late Pleistocene Neanderthals, and also, funnily enough, of some of the Cro-Magnon specimens from that period of time. So they almost seem to be following each other in adaptation terms. The question is, what would the endocast look like at this point? What changes would this actually make to the brain? Is this really meaning that the Neanderthal brain is expanding out in the vision part of the brain? And similarly for the Cro-Magnon. So the similar shape of late Pleistocene Cro-Magnon skulls suggests, to me at least, that there must have been some interbreeding going on through that time. So I'm just going to give one final run through. So that's the Neanderthal. That's the modern human. And that's the Cro-Magnon. And what I'm really thinking here is that the Cro-Magnon is looking more like the Neanderthal in terms of the extension of the occipital parts of the skull compared to modern humans, where really this shape is just being lost. And this would kind of make sense in terms of a hybridization between early humans leaving Africa and Neanderthals as they move up through the Middle East and into Europe, where these places are just completely dominated by Homo neanderthalensis. I mean, these early humans are just coming into Eurasia, an area just completely dominated, first of all by Homo erectus, and then by Homo heidelbergensis, and then completely dominated by Homo neanderthalensis. So what seems to be happening perhaps is that the human brain skull is moving back into the direction it was originally going in, the trajectory before meeting with these archaic humans. Okay, thank you. I would just like to add that really you can't make these kind of comparisons very solidly using single specimens. So I've been slightly naughty here giving these examples, because what you need to do is look at the population averages. But what I hope to demonstrate here is that even when you've got large variation within populations, when you take a human skull and you compare it with a Neanderthal skull, we're looking at two distinct adaptations to the environment with the gestalt, that's the entire picture, taking into account all of the tiny variations, making a significant difference in the whole.
They were one of the most successful human species ever. For 250,000 years, they dominated Europe, a continent ravaged by ice ages and stalked by wild animals. Then, 35,000 years ago, they faced the ultimate challenge. The arrival of another human species. This is the story of the last time two different species of human shared this planet. Only one of them would survive. Its first light, the daily routine has already begun. The hunters are a formidable team, a mother and her daughter, driven by the instinct to survive. Their kill will provide food and much more besides. 35,000 years ago, southern France was a cold and unforgiving place to live. 1,000 miles away, an ice sheet grips northern Europe, bringing polar conditions to much of the continent. In winter, temperatures can plummet to 25 below, similar to northern Canada today. Herds of woolly mammoth roam the windswept grassland. The forests offer refuge for bison and red deer. And limestone caves provide shelter for the people of this valley. These are the Neanderthals, the first human species to adapt to this harsh and frozen continent. Their lives are among the toughest ever endured by human beings, but they are well equipped for survival here. Their small clan places little stress on the environment. Close ties bind them together. Protection from the freezing cold comes from animal skins, cleaned and worn as clothing. To prepare the skin, the mother first scrapes off fat and sinew with a sharp flint blade. She uses her teeth as a vise. Her face is designed to spread the stress evenly around her skull. Her teeth are worn from many years of use. There are only 2 women in the clan. An old man, 3 adult males, and a young boy complete the 7-strong family group. The cave is the center of their world. Within its walls, they sleep, eat, butcher meat, and even defecate. The discarded waste that littered the floors of Neanderthal caves became buried and then, over time, fossilized. It has become priceless evidence that has revolutionized our vision of the Neanderthals. Far from the ape-like and brutish characters of popular myth, we now know they were a strong, intelligent, and highly adapted species. The latest scientific techniques have revealed incredible details about their lives. Fossilized feces can tell us what they ate. Teeth can tell us how they scraped animal hides to make clothing. Fractured and withered bones reveal how their lives were plagued by injury and disease. And even how some met violent and unexpected deaths. 2 generations divide the old man and the young boy. But they have one thing in common. In this harsh climate, they are the most vulnerable. Childhood is the most dangerous time. Nearly half of Neanderthal fossil record consists of children under the age of 11.
Morgan!
At 5 years old, this boy has only just been weaned from his mother's breast. Yet his brain is the size of a modern-day adult. His physical skills are advanced. It's just as well. In an environment like this, you either grow up quickly or you die. For the oldest member of the clan, life is no less precarious. He's 43 years old, but injury and exertion have broken his body, hastening old age. Already, he's living on borrowed time. 4 out of 5 Neanderthals never get to see their 40th birthday. The bones of a man aged about 40 were unearthed in the Shanidar Cave, Iraq in 1957. Scars on his ankles and ridges on his kneecaps reveal he was already crippled with arthritis. He had multiple fractures to his upper right arm. Paralyzed and misshapen, it had withered to a fraction of its normal size. The lower half of the arm is completely missing, severed above the elbow by some traumatic event in his life. Here, it lies alongside a normal, healthy bone. Close examination of his skull reveals the cause of these injuries. It's almost invisible to the naked eye, but the left side of his skull shows signs of a serious fracture. The subsequent brain damage would have paralyzed the right side of his body and may have blinded him in one eye.
Juan!
Done.
For the old, there are few concessions in this brutal world. If he is to stay with the clan, he needs to pull his weight. Neanderthals are a territorial species. This clan's territory is around 27 square miles, the range of an average day's hunt. Some distance from the cave, the clan's 3 brothers have picked up the scent of prey. The oldest brother is the leader, the strongest and most experienced. He orchestrates the hunt.
blood.
What? These deer are in their prime. Nutritionally, they're more valuable than older, sickly prey. But also much harder to catch. The Neanderthals' world was much smaller than the one we know today. Arctic tundra in the north and vast stretches of desert and sea to the south restricted their range to Europe and Western Asia. Even at their peak, it's estimated that as few as 100,000 Neanderthals may have lived within this border. Bones and artifacts have been found as far south as Israel, in Uzbekistan and the Ukraine in the east, in Poland, Germany, and even Wales in the north, to Portugal in the far west. But southwest France was one of the most densely populated regions, home to as many as 3,000 Neanderthals. The hunt has not been successful. Darkness has fallen, and the men are stranded on the edge of their territory. If they are to survive a night away from their cave, they must make a fire. Neanderthals were not the first to use fire. It had been known to humans for over 500,000 years. But their skill in harnessing it is key to their survival in this frozen continent. Fire provides warmth, of course. At night, temperatures can fall by 20 degrees. But in the open, fire is also their main means of protection. Leopards and wolves, cave lions and bears stalk this part of France. Neanderthals are not just the predators, they are also the prey. Early next morning, the hunt begins again. This time, their target is neither deer nor bison. On the border that divides their territory from the next, the brothers have stumbled upon another kind of prey. One more precious to the long-term survival of their clan. The size of their caves and the debris unearthed within them suggest that Neanderthals lived in very small groups, perhaps no more than 25, and sometimes as small as 8. Small enough to avoid putting pressure on scarce resources, but too small to ensure the survival of the species without some interaction with other groups. By kidnapping a second adult female, the clan has doubled its opportunities to reproduce, and therefore its chances of survival. The fact that Neanderthals were territorial makes it likely they were male kin-bonded, organized around fathers, brothers, and sons. Women were probably transient, moving from clan to clan. To have survived as long as they did, Neanderthals must have exchanged women. Some of these exchanges may have been voluntary. But in such a closed society, it's likely that some encounters were like this one, forcible and potentially violent. The men returned to the cave after 3 days hunting.
Aquí, este chaval.
Their catch is unexpected.
Margot. Margot.
To the dominant female, the newcomer poses a threat to her position in the clan. she must quickly assert her authority. For the new arrival, this is likely to be a terrifying experience. Everything about this clan is alien to her.
Mama, gimme.
Their smell, their clothes, their hair, even their language. For years, many scientists believed that Neanderthals did not possess language.
Mama, gimme.
They assumed that, like other primates, they communicated using only gestures and calls. Until quite recently, research on Neanderthal skulls supported this idea, suggesting that their mouth and throat were so different from ours that they probably couldn't speak as we do. But in 1983, a discovery at Kabara Cave in Israel turned this debate on its head. These three tiny fossils make up a bone called the hyoid. They sit in the throat, holding the muscles and flesh of the vocal mechanism in place. The Neanderthal hyoid is almost identical to ours, and is the most compelling evidence yet that their throat was designed for speech. It may well have been more limited than ours, but it now seems certain that Neanderthals had a language of their own. The lives of the Neanderthals are dominated by the need to secure food. At the age of 11, the youngest woman in the clan has not been hunting for long. Her prey is small, but it's fast, and she has to be skillful. The next decade or so will be her prime hunting years, assuming, of course, that she lives that long. The Neanderthals' world is a dangerous one. Almost all the adult fossils discovered so far reveal some kind of serious injury. Wild animals provide one threat. The treacherous landscape provides another. The river is swollen with melted snow. In this freezing water, the newest member of the clan will only survive a few minutes. This rescue has a selfish motive. The clan needs the new female too much to let her die. Without them, she stands little chance of survival. This interdependence has helped the Neanderthals to master their environment. But now, their dominance of Europe is under threat. In the last few thousand years, a new species has arrived here. For the first time, these Neanderthals are not alone. The men have returned to the hunt. As Neanderthal spears were not designed for throwing, killing must be done at close quarters. Driving the deer over a cliff makes it less likely that the men will injure themselves. A debilitating injury could be the difference between life and death, not just for the individual, but for the whole clan. All that remains is to carry the kill the 6 miles back to the cave.
Efmeta! Vitrak!
But Neanderthal bodies are powerhouses. They've evolved to take this kind of strain. The glaciers of Europe not only shaped the landscape, but the features of the Neanderthals who lived here. Their bones grew strong in direct response to the stress they were subjected to. The walls of Neanderthal leg bones are particularly thick. Joints around the elbow, hip, and knee are also enlarged. Shaped by the habitual pressure of living life as a Neanderthal, they also show signs of bowing. Seen in contrast to the modern leg beside it, Neanderthal bones are not just thick and bowed, they're much shorter than our own. Short, heavy bodies reduce the skin's surface area, helping to maintain a high body temperature. Even their noses evolved to cope with the extreme cold weather. Their nasal cavities are larger than our own and contain extra capillaries and mucus to warm and moisturize the air, preventing damage to fragile internal tissue. This combination of features makes Neanderthals the first human species specifically adapted to a cold climate. To our eyes, their faces may look ugly, but they are a triumph of evolutionary adaptation.
Jeder.
Now the Neanderthals face a threat for which evolution has not prepared them. Physically, these strangers are not so well adapted to the bitter climate, but they have other advantages. They've evolved new ways of living together and new ways of thinking. They are Homo sapiens, known in Europe as the Cro-Magnons. They're distantly related to the Neanderthals. One and a half million years ago, a human species called Homo erectus emerged from Africa into Asia and later into Europe. Over thousands of years, deserts, glaciers, and vast inland seas isolated the species. In the cold, harsh conditions of northern Europe, a new cold-adapted species evolved, the Neanderthals. Meanwhile, in subtropical Africa, a warm-adapted species evolved. 100,000 years ago, they expanded as far as the Middle East. 45,000 years ago, the weather turned warmer, opening up a route into Europe. And so, 10,000 years after they set out from the Middle East, the Cro-Magnons arrived in southern France. For now, their numbers are small. This advance party is scouting for new territory. These fertile river valleys in the south of France are perfect, except for one thing. This is the stronghold of the Neanderthals. The fresh kill is a welcome sight. To cope with the physical demands of their life, each adult Neanderthal needs to consume up to 4,000 calories per day. In the depths of winter, this can rise to as much as 7,000 calories, almost 3 times the amount we eat today. As he makes the first incision, the eldest brother stakes his claim. An adept butcher, he uses a razor-sharp flint to slice through the deer's belly. Today, meat makes up about 12% of the European diet. The Neanderthal diet was very different. By analyzing ground-up pieces of bone, we can tell a lot about what Neanderthals ate. Extremely high levels of carbon and nitrogen confirm that meat made up the bulk of their diet. Fossilized feces, known as coprolites, support this view. Coprolites have recently been unearthed in Gibraltar. Believed to be Neanderthal, they consist almost entirely of the remnants of meat. The meat has been well digested, suggesting that Neanderthals' bodies evolved specifically to cope with such a diet. Scientists now estimate that 85% of a Neanderthal's food was meat, on a par with carnivores like wolves. No part of this animal will be wasted. The skin will be worked to make clothing. Sinew will be dried and used as rope. The skull will be smashed open to get at the brain, the tongue, and the eyeballs. The old man is hungry. But his position within the pecking order means he has to wait his turn. Meanwhile, the youngest member of the clan has learned that it pays to be an opportunist. Inside the cave is a dumping ground where the younger brothers butcher the deer. They break its neck and sever its limbs. It's a messy job. Blood, gristle, and the remains of other carcasses cover the floor and walls. But better to do it here than outside, where the smell of fresh meat could attract predators. Like other carnivores, a special combination of enzymes in Neanderthal stomachs allows them to consume large quantities of raw meat. But cooked meat is more digestible and nutritionally less wasteful. The intense heat of the fire breaks down the protein and fat molecules, allowing them to be rapidly absorbed by the body. It's safer, too. The heat kills off parasites and deadly bacteria. The Neanderthals' ability to cook gives them an edge over the other predators that shared their world. Grooming is the glue that bonds the clan together. It's a form of communication, demonstrating loyalty, affection, and trust. Intimate contact of this kind is a pleasurable release from the stress of their world. The clan can spend up to 4 hours a day relaxing under each other's touch. These strong emotional ties have forged the clan into a resilient, self-sufficient unit. This unit has ensured their survival until now. The strengths which have sustained the Neanderthals for thousands of years are about to become weaknesses. Ironically, they are so well adapted to this world that it's hard for them to cope with the pace of change now taking place. The small size of their clan makes them vulnerable. Limited language skills make it hard for them to seek alliances with others. And their self-sufficiency blinds them to the threat that is now closing in. Suddenly, two human species stand face to face. How will they react to each other? In this harsh world, is it possible for them to coexist? A fight for survival is about to begin.